All right, guys, welcome back to chapter 10, the third part. I'm going to go through fast a little because there's quite a bit to cover. So, kind of follow along and fill out your note packets if you're doing so. That would be great. We're talking about consideration, the exchange of benefits and detriments between parties of a contract. Benefit is something that you gain, and the detriment is one of these things, giving up something. And the most common thing we give up is money. Sometimes we perform an act in exchange for somebody else's benefit. Like the guy who cut down my tree or promised to cut down my tree. He's doing something in exchange for my benefit, which is the tree being gone. He gets the benefit, the money, right? He did something that's his detriment, and I gave up the money that's my detriment, right? So giving up something or doing something could be a detriment as well. And the last one was forbearance, which is giving up the legal right to do something. And we talked about student loans may forbear. The student loan companies may give you a forbearance, which means they're not going to go forward with the legal right to collect the money you owe them for a certain period of time until you get your feet underneath you. You know, you make some money. They're going to charge you interest on the full amount, but they may give you a forbearance if you ask for it. It means they're not going to enforce their legal right to collect the money from you right off the bat once you graduate or stop going to school. All right, they're going to forbear that legal right for a period of time. All right, so that brings us on to today's stuff. We talk about adequacy of consideration too, where the consideration doesn't need to be fair. If if I need money and I want to sell my car that's worth $80,000 because it's vintage and I want to sell it for $40,000, all right, I'm fine. There's no fraud, there's no duress, there's no undue influence, which we talked about the last chapter. Then the courts don't look into the adequacy of the fairness. It doesn't have to be fair for it to be for there to be adequate consideration, unless, of course, something like this happens where it's a fast-talking salesman and they take advantage of somebody, right? And then this is called an unconscionable contract. This is the only time really they'll look into the fairness if taken to court. I don't know why I was talking about pepper one year. All right, so we're going to talk about some agreements that doesn't have consideration, and so therefore they're not enforceable. They lack consideration. And the promise to give a gift, in law they say to make a gift. So the promise to give a gift, it lacks consideration. So if I say to somebody, I say, "Hey Mac, you're a good guy. I'll give you my watch, at the end of the school year." Well, all right. I may say that, but there's no consideration because there's really no benefit on my part, right? I didn't get any. There was no benefit, so there's no consideration. When I give a gift, all right, it becomes the other person's property, all right? But promising to give a gift isn't enforceable. A gift is given freely. It's given, out of kindness or whatever the case may be. But the promise for me to give Mac my nice watch after he graduates isn't enforceable by law. So here's a couple of scenarios that we're going to go through. Tim's mom knows that he's been skipping school, so she offers to pay him $5 a day for every day he attends, payable at the end of the school year. Right? Well, that sounds like it's a valid agreement, but really, there's a couple of reasons why it isn't a valid agreement. But the main reason why it's not a valid agreement and therefore not enforceable is because by law, Tim being a minor has to attend school. So a promise to obey the law lacks consideration and is therefore not enforceable. All persons are obligated to obey the law. So any contract made where a person needs to obey the law is unenforceable because there's no consideration. Here's another case. Lee stole Bob's yacht. Boss Hogg, the county sheriff, witnessed the theft. Bob told Boss Hogg, "I'll pay you $1,000 to arrest Lee." Boss Hogg arrests Lee. Is he entitled to the $1,000? Remember, Boss Hogg is the sheriff. The answer is no, he's not. All right? Because Boss Hogg has a pre-existing duty. Bob's promise to pay is not legally enforceable because Boss Hogg already had the duty to arrest Lee. It's his job. He's getting paid for that already. So in making the arrest, Boss Hogg suffers no legal detriment. Right? And therefore, there's no consideration. If you have a pre-existing duty to do something, actually doing it doesn't furnish consideration for anything extra. Right? That's called a pre-existing duty. If a person is under legal obligation to do something, a promise to do the same thing does not furnish consideration. Here's another case. A heavy object falls from a shelf. Jane pushes Sam out of its path, saving her from major injury or death. Sam, in relief, says to her, "Oh, you just saved my life. I tell you, I'm going to pay you $100 a month for the rest of your life for saving my life." The question is this a valid contract? Is there consideration? The answer is no. This is called past consideration. The giving of and exchanging of benefits and detriments has to take place at the time the contract is made. It can't be something that happened in the past, even if it was moments ago. Right? The exchange of benefits and detriments has to take place in the present. I wasn't sure if there's anything else associated with that. All right, so that is called past consideration. And even if they promise to pay her $100 for the rest of their life, they don't have to. It might be a crappy thing to do, but they don't have to. There's no valid contract. This kind of gets a little confusing. Tex promises to sell to Benny, and Benny promises to buy from Tex as many bushels of tomatoes as Benny might decide to order from Tex at $28 a bushel. Now this is a little confusing. So what happens here is Tex is producing tomatoes. Benny offers says, if I decide to buy tomatoes, I'll pay you $28 a bushel. Well, there's no consideration here. This is called an illusory promise. It lacks consideration. There's really no promise of anything because maybe that if statement and the ambiguity or uncertainness of it we talked about in other chapters, right? It's an illusion. It looks like there may be a contract, but Benny may decide to not buy any tomatoes. Right? If he doesn't buy any tomatoes, there's no benefit, there's no detriment, there's no promise of giving up something, there's no promise of really doing anything, right? So it's an illusory contract. It's an illusory promise. There's no consideration, and therefore it's not enforceable. Right? Both parties here aren't obligated to do something, and there needs to be that obligation for there to be consideration. And the last one is an interesting one, our prom question. Agreements without consideration. Any agreement to attend a social engagement is not enforceable. All right, so if I promise to take so-and-so to a fancy restaurant, a date to a fancy restaurant, and I say I'll meet you there, and I don't meet them there, and they go and they order whatever, they can't sue me for it necessarily. Right? Because any promise to attend a social agreement is unenforceable. And, it used to be the courts were pretty steadfast in saying, no, this is you stood her up for the prom, this is a social engagement, and social engagements lack consideration. And boom, so that was it. But now the courts are looking at it a little bit differently. where they're okay. Well, money was spent. Uh, time and money and planning and all this kind of stuff. So courts may find some kind of remedy here and there once in a while, but typically agreements to attend social engagements are not enforceable. And so here's a list. This brings up a very interesting question. We're not going to get to that part yet. That's the last part. What about an engagement ring? That's interesting. I only have a minute left, but think about this. What do you guys think? You offer your engagement. Marriage is a contract, right? Who keeps the ring if the engagement is broken off? The ring is a gift. It says right up on top of there, the promise to give a gift, or the give it. And when you give a gift, it becomes does it become the property? We just said that, the property of the other party, or it's a promise of marriage. So if the marriage doesn't happen, do you have to give it back? That's an interesting question, isn't it? Well, we'll do a little bit of research before we go and talk about the next section of this chapter, and we'll take a look and see who keeps the ring. Have a good day, guys. Bye.